당도 다점 제 송셰베게 다 우미 데믹스야지 다 상유 점된디기 저기 안지게 동아시아다 디기주베 탑람 안지게 직사보수 송주베데 되는 우미 따와세 송셰교지 지난다 데니가 하고 얘기 된다나 인가 신이야기 된다라 점치기 안에 식용요제 된다 님보치 뒤신파 저기 우메 데믹스 때까지 데믹스도 아주 데믹때 예와 있는 아주 고자 체제 컴베나로 주야라기로와 지산 디메메나 주야라가 디나시 데니게 롭종 체에도 안에 상유 점nen디 손셰베 따르기 남샤티게 야보 하고야 나 디메나지리 해야지 다디 베지 코로나 참고로 우메 데믹스 디스모로와.
Good evening. So tonight we're going to continue to look at His Holiness's text, the Key to the Middle Way. So Buddha Shakyamuni taught the Middle Way, this unique, skillful method to eliminate suffering. His Holiness then composed a short 28-page text so that, independent on us coming to understand it, we can open ourselves up to the Middle Way. So just like a key opens a door, this text opens us up to coming to realize the middle way view, the requisite to eliminate suffering completely. Through opening ourselves up to the middle way view, through this text, with its brief, concise presentation, we can come to understand the extensive presentation that Buddha Shakyamuni presented. So we have it, the whole vast meaning of the middle way presented in this one concise text.
Mogoye de karesina dunga di kuguyo ma kanga di kuguyo ma res dinga zu myaba syo kugu re jire ta nganzo la kar kugu resina dewa dan kibu di kugu res chisa di dewa di kibu di tubye ki ane nganzo di kugu re di tubye ke tablam di nganzo di tubye ke tablam di peji tango re sungor wada.
This text has been composed and presented so as to enable beings to fulfill our deepest instinctive yearning for lasting, stable happiness, a happiness that is freed from problems and suffering. Because at a deep level, what do we not want? Any problems. None of us are happy when things don't go away, or we suffer, or we have physical or mental pain of any way, any type. We only want happiness, lasting, stable happiness. And this text presents a method to achieve that.
동아 영화에 림발라 소마다 니차고로 체결 제가 아주기 치 중앙 류를 땜베기 치기 중화다 류를 땜바 안 동아 영화 직제 안낭 삼로 단탕이 토네 안에 강아체네 동아 영화다지 동아 영화 니 용거래 다 디나신 아주 디기딜이야 류에 가서 치 튕겐다 아주 류를 땜베기 디기 영화 직제 안디 낭 삼로 단에 삼로 토네 디기 주다 직제 제가 림바 동아 영화 될라 류 치 겐 류를 땜베 동아 영화에서 디파 세바이나 세야도 아주 류를 땜베기 치 튕겨라 때는 디기도 용거 류를 디기 용거로 와. 자 나가 삼로 때네 강아 동아 중고요 봐서 니 동아디 패세네 세바이나 나semle 땜베 디기도 주고로 와. 제가 동아 영화다 니요 봐서 디기 주다 되야라 답람리 니 차요 그래서
So recognizing our wish to experience only happiness and to be freed from pain and misery, we then need to identify where our unwanted suffering and misery comes from. So there are two directions from which it comes. The first is from the external material world, and the second is from our inner world, our way of thinking. So it's either through from our body or the material world that we experience suffering, or from our way of thinking. Similarly, our paths of happiness are in the same direction. We can achieve happiness through altering our material world, and we can achieve happiness through altering our inner world.
Dene inzada nga zuki jitin bigi ta jigi lega roja mang che nga zu karchi rosin chi gi tungien da dene gi tembi lu gi tegi di chugo ro cha di ruya da nga zu lega lego re an jigi ya kyam kyam roya ro da nga zuki kala su chi ten ya chwe ten che ya la so ba cha sa di che di chi tungien da su le tembi gi an nga zu lu de tembi tegi ruya da dunga se di setup de nga zu nam ni ja yong ra nga zu je di go ro 다 낭셈나 때네 셈나 때네 디기 줍다네 셈게 동아 강아 세타디 만주기 지딘비기 지소하라 지라기 라렌 베시던 거 말아 지단 디 랍제 조디 만주기 다데 점낸 상유 점낸 디기 말랍제 송샤고래 지단 디 송하디 데리아네 삼노 가니스타나 안데지게 삼노 가니스타네 강아 용고래 삼노 강아 세야레 삼노 가니스탄 고래 세비 안데 딩아주 디난마 다 송고로 바디
Our society in general primarily focuses on the material world in terms of eliminating problems that we experience from the material world or achieving happiness through the material world. And we can see this in how people seek happiness through their career choice, being with friends and loved ones, sources of entertainment. These are all largely focused on achieving happiness and overcoming problems through the material world. The inner world, our way of thinking, whilst not completely ignored, comparatively, it largely is. It is not a focus of society. But nevertheless, it's through these two streams of the outer world and the inner world that our problems and difficulties arise, as well as being the area of transformation to achieve happiness.
Dene inzada nga zuki jinang chi tungien tohne kanga yongya dele zo rik mangbo chik nga zuki semgi suye she nga zuki mi suye she samla tangtangi tohne an marikwe kienche na kanga mangbo chik suye gore jizan ni gyaram chiki ta nga zimli nali ya jidang koryo songgyopda jik jungwe tungien chubi kienche neya mangbo ligo kanga mangbo ligo re ina dele rik mangbo chik nga zu mi suye gore kanga zune kanga mangbo suye gu dus jizang zi makshu kya dang an jiki koryo songgyopda nebe jawa jaya dang an jiki lega jiki duxine jiki gogar daya dang an jiki gosu rezo jaya dang dene ki mangbo chik kanga mangbo rik mangbo chik nga zu mi suye gu dus mi suye bi kanga mangbo shik lik dus jizang deso nga zu mi suye ma suye na deso yungayo ma jizang mi suye bi dunga mangbo shik lik gores jizang di seya da tablam dele ya nga zuki samla daje sam se go chire jizang semgi gang samlo daje ma se tuya chire se go go se tuya chire se go da.
So whilst we can identify these two streams of either where problems come or sources for happiness, when we think about it, even the external world, the material world, those sources of problems and difficulties that people experience, these are largely created by people. They are not, therefore, divorced from mind. They're not divorced from the inner world. For example, deceit, taking advantage of others, conflict between peoples, war between nations. This comes about independent on a way of thinking. It's being created by people. Likewise, when say, the machinery or technology causes harm, this too has been developed by people and therefore is not divorced or alienated from ways of thinking. So therefore, His Holiness's emphasis is on transforming the inner world, because through transforming the inner world, one also will have a profound impact on the material world.
Manju samli thone kanga se tuya res jesa dine zang samlo gywa tang gu res je ta samlo thone ga je go res de samba sangbo dang ba se de manju ki samlo na la ya an samlo zangan ya du gi yawa she ba samlo khor da ya du gi yawa che da shen le ge samlo ngam ba shen le ne be rik ra shen ni ga le ne be rik samlo de ge pa me ba se go res 지산다 라션 니가래 팬비게 삼로디게 삼보 상보세 인디소 나주기 라렌다 냠는 제대야 뉴버철당 고레스 지산 디 삼로니디 야와체 고레스 지산데 나주디 넘균네 나주기 랴 가르지나 디 삼로를 야와마체제 파장자 다전시고 지산 디네 상안주 소수게 삼로도 파 제바체 삼로 상안디 야와체 삼망 엠베릭디 파 매바쇠 간에스 매바쇠야다 근데 삼로 상비 릭대서 삼로데 양내 양도 파다지 야 누가 철당 고래서 그러다디 되니 제바이나 맞아 셈게 되네 강아세 두그래 셈게 되네 시디 두그래 송그래다
So therefore it's of crucial importance that we transform our way of thinking. So as our text has already presented, we can look at our consciousness and divide various individual minds into the group that we can call wholesome and the group that we can call unwholesome. And the way to differentiate between an individual consciousness as to whether it's wholesome or not is whether it harms oneself or others, or whether it brings benefit to oneself and others. And those individual consciousnesses that bring harm, these we need to eliminate. And those individual consciousnesses, the wholesome ones, which bring benefit to oneself and others, these we need to develop. And the way that we develop and eliminate certain ways of thinking is through changing our habituation. Those unwholesome ways of thinking, we have a habituation towards them. This we need to weaken and thereby eventually eliminate. And alongside this, together at the same time, our wholesome ways of thinking, these we need to strengthen our habituation too. And as our wholesome ways of thinking become ever stronger and we become more habituated to them, then conversely, the unwholesome habituations will weaken.
당제 아주 강아 세 투기여바디 땅 아주게 세보를 아주 배선로 쉬쉬베나 배나 아주게 파조 점링자 파조 탕로 줘야 되게 되게야 안직 아주 공부하자 좋아하잖아 갈래하고 쉬우지야 갈래하고래 안 점링 다른 부산다 잡산다 조투에 하고로 계속 봐도 제발에 제가 되네자 아니 미 삼로 땅제 천리그 삼로 땅 삼로게 제바제 또 제 배제 땅제 천리게 넘주쇠서 넘주쇠로 제가 넘주쇠는 남로 푸야디 당번에 삼로 땅 미게 삼로 마땅하네 넘주데 어가 넘주인 푸긴세도 용아제메로 미 삼로 땅 되네 제로 제조 줍 되는 수는 넘주쇠 넘주게 제단이 미 파소 줘야 되고다 취재자라다 밀리에 배제배 야고 땅야기 망고시우여로 와다 엔티나이진 다데가도 예자라다데 엔다디디 나네엠디 세엘야 안 미기 망고죠 아다 미망네엠디 미망고 시루 아자 닝제다 미디기 송급 제고 삼제 삼나다제다 데니기 몽고의 맨 탑람간에 수요도지 리버다 삼나다 삼니기 제바지 당보 삼노들레 미망고 시루도 밀강아 망보 강아데 세고도 선배 삼노실레 디세마 상보로와 디기 겐제나 삼노 디기 겐제네 데네 제쇼 파 제바제 포심주제도 젠데네 몽고가 나세디 맨디 소용으로 제가 니 맨디기 배제 따제 미망고지 송급제 세소를 송급제도 팽거로 제가 니 자위기 다번에 강원고 맨 인생 되어요마로와 니 맞은 바래 제가 미게 삼노다 삼노게 혼에 현리에 편배 삼노제 판심 디톤에 아니 제바지 심주제도 수제네 수제네 맨디제네 만줄이 편야지 망고자 제가 디수 차상 넘조레 만주기 취재 잘라레 만주기 팬비릭 망고지 삼로 상보 될라 때네 밀리에 팬도고 미리 강한 세고 스미 잠재게 삼로지 팬비 삼로지 깨네 삼로 디원게다 니가 제바 제제 삼로 배제 다쟁아 저기 취셔다 되네 망보 주쟁아 줄래 밀리아 판도야 쇼지 두투고 봐 제가 디소 먼저 삼로 배제 다네 이거로 봐 니가 저기 다 세워 맞아 통쇼스 교부 세워 차대로 와
The approach that one needs to take to transform our way of thinking is to use our intelligence, in particular our reasoning intelligence. And we can understand this through looking at our material world. So before one embarks on a new project, for example, one uses one's intelligence, again, in particular, one's reasoning intelligence. So, for example, at some point, not too long ago, people were looking at how flight could be made possible. So some skilled future aviators were looking at how to invent technology that would enable humans to fly. So they would have had a wish to fly. They would have seen that this would be of great benefit to people, and they developed the first planes. And then there was subsequent development based on those initial designs. Those involved in the design process and the production process would have been thinking, how can I build something really useful that achieves a goal that many people would find beneficial and that would be safe and easy to use? And with this motivation, they set out on a remarkable journey, discovering what had never been discovered before. And then an even more recent illustration. A year ago, seeing the grave danger our entire world's population is in, or because of the pandemic, world leaders, together with their great scientists, got together to seek out solutions through science and solutions through policy, to ensure that in this time of grave danger, that people could be rescued, could be saved from catastrophe. And with this motivation to be of benefit to others, something remarkable has been achieved. So we can see here from these, and also from what you know so much better than I do in terms of our modern world, how much use and benefit comes from so much of the material objects around one, modern technology, and so forth. And this has been developed largely with a motivation to bring benefit, a sense of curiosity, a sense of purpose, a sense that through this technique, something beneficial can be done for all. Our modern material world has been created.
Da samlo nala ngamba shenla nube samba shivane shenla suya tang jomya tang dorya ge samlo ngamba shikeba na deni ki digi da samlo digi peche na je ne twishe jala be ji barze shukchembo dortu ya suya shine digi yin suya tang bo khana barze mi dorya ge twishe chöncherik de dönyo marwa jesa mi ge samlo na je shenla neba na deni ji suya ne mi digi sne tupsare Denis Söben, Company store to Sarasebe, Denigi, Samot and Ributa, Denigi, Duting Mango, Denigi, Jebache, Denis Tranjari Mango, Search, Digi Kienjene, and Zemlina Lamajada, Misoyada, Denigi Paganga Mango, this is just a Misovarishas, Chazakangati, Samot Nata, Magic Bikini, Samot de la Shanle, Nebe Samba, Skio, Digi, Tebu de la Tene, Shan, Gangatea Mango. 대신에 셰바나 샬레 판베 삼로 께바이나 디게 데레테네 샬레야 판바 동화세야다 디기 주변에 망부충도 제사 삼로 상엔세 샬레 뉘베 삼바데 삼망안바데 디기 메바 디방고레스 삼로 상보세데 샬레 판베 삼로 디기 삼로 상보데 디양아 저 메이 베시당 야게 당고레사지 난 언도스 네 데네 숭어 제사 디네자 겨름치기 또 갈숭고레스는 아주기 zemlinala milya jamjidi shukchimgu diya darge yarge tanggudu jamjidi zemlinala mi mangbolya jamjidi shukchimgu phege tang tubayna zemlinala hididi yongtugreso ondu sungorwa.
In that previous segment then, what those illustrations had in common is that from a wish to be of benefit, utilizing then various human skills, in particular one's intelligence, so many amazing things have been done. But should that motivation, though, be one to bring harm, then utilizing the human skills of intelligence, so much harm is done. So equally then, the development in the world that leads to harm and destruction has also largely been brought about by human intelligence. For example, the modern world has truly weaponry of awful strength. This has been designed by human beings. And whilst there may have been on one level a superficial presentation of this is to protect my group, these were still designed with a kill strength in mind. So one cannot argue that the motivation here was to be of benefit. The motivation was primarily to bring harm. So of these two, what they have in common is the outcomes which are wholesome, outcomes which are unwholesome. They have come about in dependence on a way of thinking. Minds and motivating minds which are either wholesome or unwholesome. And when we look at what brings benefit in the world, what do we want to experience and receive in our world, it's very clear. We want a world where the material development is about benefiting humanity. We don't want the development that brings harm, whether it's through warfare or environmental destruction. So this is why His Holiness emphasizes that to bring about peace in the world, what we need to do to bring about outer peace is to develop inner peace. And this is done through cultivating consciousnesses such as love and compassion. So it's through the development of love and compassion within beings throughout the world that peace will be achieved.
semgi wangyur chigor ma khonzu ge sem wangyur tu go ma sem yo khonzu wangyur chigor moja la ma sona moja dewa na shin de sem de che moja de anzu subu na chi juwa na she jiza moja ga jo moja de nang moja tangen de la ba wa kan to na khwe la ba jab lo to na dun to ye lo na moja tang la ba che go re jiza di na shi nga zu gu lu da ane chi chi yu goi ba de che sa nga zu sem yo wangyur na cha de yo re de ne za nga zu zo nga zu 나 저기 낭배 상교 줌는 디기 동화세야 단 디기 주비에 두타디 조 셈리아 베제데 셈 상황이 야와하고 와제 남비릭디 파 뇌차 콩조 나자 샬레 네베 삼바 디수파 메와서 고래지 고래 다 셈상보 샬레 펜베 삼바 잠베 잠바단 제와 아니 지기 샬레 네베 지기메 송외 삼바 추름라서 봐 근데 네게 셈디게 상비릭디게 하는 아주 냠레지 디순 네베 찰당 고래야지 아니 그 생각도 디고야 지 디링이 야야 쉬어마 그 생각만 디고 쉬사로 하다
Not only has our material world largely been created by consciousness, in that it was created by people, but people who were motivated by their consciousness, also the material world is utilized by consciousness in the sense that people make use of the material world in dependence on thought, on intention. So for example, a car, it can be used in a wholesome or unwholesome way, depending on the motivation of the driver. Moreover, a car is on its own quite useless, but with the driver and with the driver's motivation, the car can drive. So these illustrations hopefully show clearly what Buddha Shakyamuni taught, that the happiness we long for and the suffering that we long to be freed from is primarily dependent on our mind. It's a way of thinking that leads to happiness or suffering primarily. Therefore, unwholesome minds such as anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, these we need to reduce and eventually eliminate. And wholesome minds such as love, compassion, generosity, ethics, and so forth, these we need to cultivate and strengthen our habituation to. So this and the preceding points we've already covered in the preceding 5 talks.
어디네 자당 주에 낭배기 최 냠린 제가 되라 네 좀다 마와 시 다 좀다 소소기 안에지게 나 주인 다바게 나네다 다비게 단 다미 벤 남샤 그래서 안에가 두 소소소소 두시네 나 주인 냠린 제다 림바 마선다 되네 시로 차되어서
We've also briefly touched on the 4 different philosophical tenets. So that was last time near the bottom of page 2. where there are, according to different Buddhist, the 4 different Buddhist philosophical schools, there are varying degrees of subtlety of selflessness presented.
당부게 젠디 당번에 가봐 봐도 젠디 때네 직자 아니 지 마름 럽다 지름 럽다 터름 럽다 이 유니버스에서 여러 와다 되네게 디나신다 머니 가 저기 낭비 쳐라 냠는 따르기 토네 냠는 제가 될라 되네게 가지고 지당 럽장라 되네게 짐바 마선도 숨여바 나신 되네게 럽장 시간 될라 된데 짐바로시 언두스 용용자 될이야 준다 마와 시세야디 제라마도 되바 아니 주 semza umaba se shicha shite ko menigi denjil masona denigi benanga jigi shirim lobra and jirim lobra and jigi thorim lobra se ming ta bana shin ondu shin ming di jiba cha derwa.
And when we're looking at the bottom paragraph on page 2, we also mentioned last time the reason for why 4 different tenets are presented, why there are these different philosophical views. And the reason was, just like in our education system, a pupil progresses through stages of training, stages of their education, going from kindergarten through primary school, high school, and then on to university. And the whole way they are developing knowledge based on what they had previously learned until they get to the point where they have a degree from university. But they needed to train in a specific sequence so as to achieve the best result possible. So similarly, the Buddhist philosophical views are presented in a particular sequence of subtlety, starting with the Vaibhashika, progressing to the Sautrantika, the Chittamatra, and the Madhyamaka, those 4 philosophical schools.
And then my sitting it my share the honor, so that denegi to take Cabaratinum, Jimnendi, Sumba Inam, said the Tivol Masan, that Drupta, Jeramawa, and Dodeba, and the same to Umaba said Druptagi Shiubana, the Nei Shidi, Sanyu Jimnendi, Suma Reda Mare, searching at the Tiwashili water, just and Dineza, Dinigi, Druptegi, Cabar Shiubadi, Sanyu Jimnendi, Suma Redam Inam, said the Tiwa Chagoro Inam says.
So now let's turn to the text and pick up where we concluded last week. So near the top of page 3 at the question, did the Buddha set forth all these different schools of tenets?
Be Xin Dine Gang Lobju Namjun Chashasa Lobson, Legon Dine Sevare, Chanda Sevare, Sema, Legon Dine Sevare, Mari Sachi, Legon, Senden Bude Juna, Disena, Kinyamji, Kelenjada, Senden that in a Jigmevana or Jikemilan Bang, Giona Yungura, Jalakarina, Jike. Sota Senden in the Sevano, or the Yahores and in Jada. Senden Meva, Zumus added in all the Zumari Dinas Yomara, Sachi Yongro, and Dinashin Sigurda, the Nigi, that the Nigi to Shinam Jadi, San Yachum and Yusun Re, Mari, says it, Son Rebe, said to what led the Ligorwa, Betinashire.
Similarly, if one asks the question, the particular education system that we have was in society, who created this? So that's the same question here, and the reason behind would be wanting to see whether the authority who established the education system is trustworthy or not, is reliable or not. Can we have confidence in this education system or not? So that type of thinking is similar to this question here.
Inna, so Inna, Dode Gana Gala Din said. That Sanyu Jumden, you saw Inna, Drumdaji, Sanyu Jumden, the she did Drumda Suaina, and the Sanyu Jumden, the Sung Domango Sung Yobanza, and the Jiggy Jerama, Dodeba said, the Sanji Sun, you docarelli tingores, Caril Kundu, that Dokundu said Sigore, Kawal Kundu she, Jigores, Semzambadi. Sanji Sun you docarelli Kundu gores, and Umabadi, Sanji Sun docarelli Kundu gores, or that Ina Dode Gana Gana dance to the Carleting gores.
The text continues. If he did, on what sutras do each rely? In other words, of the four philosophical schools, then which do each rely? What sutras serve as the basis for each of the philosophical schools? And then just to say, as an aside, if some people are more comfortable with the English words for the philosophical schools, they're in a key on right at the end of the text, I think page 29.
Dine dupti chokmanda ane sabche kyang lungla tingko ba inam sena serda da dupti chokman la de da ngan ge chokman se de yakdu ge kishi ma da choda member se ne gabriela ngan chi di cho se yaga se member se duwa se kubo da di chi go ma cho se choda men se de cho sang de geche shung kishi wol samlo shiin benang azu thoram lab kan de la shiin di geche yorwa ko zu geche za ko ya cho sa je geche wa re sa je cho se de geche wa ko ko shiin geche many lab da ma wol lab kan de ding lab kan de ge shiin di de thoram lab kan jina shiin de ge chung go wa samlo shiin de ge chung go yuen de lob jong de ge chung wa shiin ge chung wa za cho men se de shiin geche shung gi 시행 개체와 줌다마와기 디스코스 줌다마와나래 가시 시행 개체와 가시 시행 개충어 여러 가지서 줌다마와의 코로나도 시행 개체충당 안에 줌다마와의 나네 거제 롭찬을 마서나 롭찬 깔래 카와다 데실레라서 주로와다가 사바다 시데 롭찬 베스트 깔래 카와다 야 시로데스 네 케발 사바다 안디니게 케발 되게 네 룬라 땡고고를 배 룬가를 룬라 땡고바 제베 룬라 땡고고를 배 산지 룬라 땡네 하고고를 배 땡고고를 배 세고르다 데티와르 상아서 되게 파티와르 차고로 와드네.
And the question concludes, also does the difference of status and depth of the schools of tenets necessarily depend on scriptural authority? So hereby status and depth, the questioner is asking about these four different philosophical schools. They do differ, and they are presented in a specific sequence. Is that sequence? What is the basis for that sequence? Is it scriptural authority? And in terms of status and depth, we can understand this as superiority and inferiority between the different philosophical schools, because if they're presented in terms of a sequence with one being seen as higher and one as lower, there's a superiority and an inferiority, and clearly greater value is presented to the presentation in the superior or the higher schools. So here the question is this based on scriptural authority? Is this differentiation based on scriptural authority?
Tadi diwada de lenro shirwada rupta shi tawi kebaranam jumden de nigi doja lo rabding tasum la ngwebe wangyo sumba in la sir. Jesa de sanye jumden digi sumare sgorwada.
And then the answer comes. The different views of the four schools of tenets were taught by the Buddha himself in accordance with the mental capacities of his followers, whether superior, middling, or modest.
Desa drupta dinige tawe namsha khebar dige an sanyu jumde songware de an gan songda de gan songware se dat ben drupta tawe ji khebar jumden digi se de jumde ji songware se gorwa da di bardo songware se chi ta.
The first point that is emphasized in the answer is the different views of the four schools of tenets were taught by the Buddha himself. So this then is a very clear statement that we can see that all of the four Buddhist philosophical schools are based on Buddha's teachings. So in the question, scriptural authority refers to teachings by the Buddha himself.
Tamala debe gwebe wang songwa yinjerwa. Jita garasa warasana duja lo rabting tasum sidi pini labdala ya mini zini mawa tigele ko shiyen tues lo ma shiyen ma sona lo rosana lo ja tues chungwa chagurwa shiyen shiyen la. many ding the ya, then the Gubachu chewing the one, that Galasam Lobsang Dorje, Galasam Yabush, she and the Dorje Gachimachagua. But Dile to Trum Labda de Gilia, she and the Bear Massy Gachimu Shadow, or to she and catch, Chazan to she and Gachim Lobdol Mason Menigi, she and Dorje Chua, Dele de Ding, Tele Gacho, Sumyoba Nashi, and the Nambi, Chile, Yamlen Chicken Delea, she and Delia, some Tantantonia, she and Denigi, Lo, Rap Sedeta, she and Trum Labda and some Tantan, she and Gacheva de Che, Ding Sedi. Dinum Lobragi many, the Lobsang and she and the Ding Yobaja. Tamas the many, she loved to Chunchu Diki, she and Naji Chiclot, she and the Chuaenza, and as a lot of Teddy, lot of Teddy, Consolia, Ganze Sing de Gajag, Lobsendi, Consugi, Chesel, Papa Lobsang or Mato, many Zilichu, the Torum Lobdago Lobsang, and Pandoyo Mare, and you can go about Dunda to Mare. Just console got it done the Dugos and Lobsen Chua de Gema, Chunju de Gepa, Jeven, Consul, Jaya Lela, Donata to one. Dina she many Labra Chunjung, Lobsen D, in the Toram Lobsen Jahan de Gil Jeven, Nidia Pandoyo Mara Console. Just on Console Pando Carson, Consul, she say the Bak Lobsen de Tehorua. On Dina she, San Jumden Digi, Nangbe Cholo Lobson Chicken de la Lord Rapting. Tasum said the cause of Shiyingi, Jantangi, Rimbo Horonsalia, Shesegi, Yagata, just Tinda, the Nigi, Tasumbo Della Dene, and Echo Ma Chusung, Lobsen Sungadia, and Consul Pando Guebi once, Consul Pandogi, Chechungi Wangi, and Consulia, and Descent Midamera Sunga, Reservoir.
The second key point then in the first sentence is, in accordance with the mental capacities of his followers, whether superior, middling, or modest. So this then presents the reason for Buddha Shakyamuni having taught 4 different philosophical schools of views. He divided his presentation. There was a gradient to his presentation, and this was because of the varying mental capacity of his followers. So we can understand this clearly through our own experience in education. Before, let's say one went to university to study science, one could only study science at university because of having studied science in high school and before that in primary school. One's teachings were presented in a gradient. In dependence on one's studies of science in primary school, one could understand what was taught in high school. And independence on that basis, one could go to university and train in one's speciality there. And this was done in accordance with the mental capacity of the child and eventually the young adult. If the young child was taught university-level science, they would have been tremendously confused. It would not have been in accordance with their mental capacity. Similarly, if the university-level student was taught primary school science, they would have been really bored, and they certainly wouldn't have gained any benefit. So therefore, a skilled teacher, such as the Buddha, presents the teachings in accordance with the varying capacities of their students. Some will be of superior capacity, some middling, and some of modest capacity. The answer continues. Some followers were likely to fall into the views of nihilism or were in danger of losing faith if taught selflessness. For them, Buddha even taught the existence of a self in some sutras.
oda dame sido da de ji ga gu yo ma re sem be sem che da zhe ye gi nian ga ge yue ba yin na san yi gi pa si ji de ni ge nian ga yue ba yin na kon zhe ya ane da me ba sung gu ma re si san da yo re se sung gu re se da yo ko pan do ga re chi gi yue ba de le da yo ba sung ba yin na di yin nam sha ke lim be to ne kon zhe ya de gi zhu ya da du ha se le pan do che yung gu re de za de su ya da me ba sung bi na kon zhe ya an du ha ma da digi 주변에 발시치고 진짜 되네 유여바이나 될이야 ane 다음에 뭐 송하지 다음에 요래서 송고래서 송바 요래서 근데 가실래 다음에 뭐 송바이나 다음에 뭐 송고도 진짜 다 요르와다디 상계세 다디 최등에는 처음에디 절 최닝이 디디 야고 신문도 선배게 대발 대로게 니가 요르와 되네 유여바이나 안 대술이야 코로나 주기 거바당 콘솔 내가 가리 판대 쉐도 콘솔에 다디 내가 다 요래서 쉐바 있나 아니 콘솔에 판도 체 요래 디기 주비야 동아세야 판도 체 요. 디네자 상얘기 아니 도가시 나리아 다 요래서는 송 요래 송바 요래 지래.
As is presented in these two sentences, there were many students for whom, if they were to hear that there is no truly existent self, they would find that unacceptable, and they would be in grave danger of falling into the extreme of nihilism. If they were taught that the self doesn't exist, they may come to think that it doesn't exist at all, and therefore fall into the extreme of nihilism. So therefore the Buddha taught them in some sutras that the self does exist. And the reason that he taught them then that the self does exist, in other words, he didn't teach them selflessness, is because he knew there would be greater benefit for them. Because if they were to fall into the extreme of nihilism, this would be a severe impediment to their spiritual development. It would be a severe obstacle to their accumulation of virtue, because they would believe things do not exist at all. And especially if they develop the view that phenomena do not exist at all, that and other wrong views could easily arise within them.
뇌다 판도 진이나네 뇌섭 채워요. 네 뭐이 니수인바네 마송바제 네 코로나리아 네 다여바 송바이나 코로나에 디기주에 동화세 판도 채용해서 디내갑을야 아니 곧 내갑칠리더니 용구여바서 콜 다여바 송바제 다여바 송 아니 디네기 냠이 삼다지 디네 고 냠네지 롭장 지기지기지도 아니 가슴질야 고 시세데 삼로디 파 삼로 따야다 뉴바 개체로도 디네 고 젤야 뭐 다음에 비다비 남샤 송에 용고로와.
The Buddha is the most skillful of guides, and with this most skillful of guides, motivated by both wisdom and compassion, would lead in the best of ways, lead beings towards the eventual attainment of lasting, stable happiness. And he would therefore be able to teach beings precisely in accordance with their own individual spiritual disposition, their own individual karmic background. So for those for whom it was most suited, he taught there is a self. And later, when they had developed spiritually sufficiently, he would only then introduce the view of selflessness to them.
Chevrolet sure tossing a house, the Nima, the Bendigo Treblia destroyer. Left tongue, you left tongue. You left tongue, the Chevrolet.
So, similarly, when one teaches young children, the teacher needs to be really skillful to be able to teach them in a way that they can relate to.
Karelamne, Nanzulumbe deva, Chik Posle, Eagle, Labdu Kablia, Chidan, Chikanzo, Sandoina, Gabo, Mabo, Nabo, Lapshamado, Kanba, Yidus, Tish, Labimado, and a Chilagorwa. Then the wall Labdu Kala, Kansla with Lena, and Chige, Gabo Race, Nakabo Labdu Kala, Chik Sando, Gabo, the most of Migli Duenche, Gabo Saja. Then Sondorjin, Mombores, the most of Migli Mombo Saja, and Chichidu, and many Lavana, Migi at home, the Lamsa Odin, Mombola, the Denichi Lagore, some big Lamsa Lol Chayajida, and Gabola, the Deni Lagus Lol Chardio, Migi Guinema, Gabo, now was it, Dambola Ducale, and Descale Chedua, and Dinajin Delia. Labra yen chungju da pu chungju da nga zugi da pu chungju re da ya di men bigi mi chembu lo jong dang bo jiang zu lia labra yen zu jia la mong bu xie wu duo de ne ge mong bu ji ke jin re ji de ji duan an ni pa zhuo lab de yang ko long yen de pa zhuo pe yi zhuo an cu xue de ko long cu yong du ji de nga zugi de ji de ne a da go lab ne pa zhuo o de ne xie la ge duo xue la di la ge da shen bigi company lia ge jing wo zu jie dang wo duan yong de sem lia cha de le la ra ji an Denigi Mevajem, go of the George Lagore, and the Kamla Shaw Lagore said, the nation of she's the Migi time at the Simlia, and there's the Hawker Galacado, the Lapsangi Chavar Chagdo, Carson, Lap Migi Mini, Dennis Lapna, Consul Panto Che, or Dennis Jehore, Sempigi, Nyamship Chene, Laptadi, Yawaha Goinza, and then Laptadi Cavashorova. Just a Denisa, Sanyu Gemnendi, choose from the Dina Jigbareda, Sanyu Gemnendi, Holong, Nyamshi, Yamandos, Nyamyo Tone, Malaptadilia, Adusine, Laptadi, Ya, Dungur, Tangazugi, Laptaro, the Nyamyoda, Chick, Medi, and the Dire, Sheshavana, Sinia de Galaka Chagdo, Adini got. Ma Labda Yen Sosolia, Pugula Labda, Laptale, Chavarado, Dinashin, Lama, Janzuki Semi Duma said, the Digututa, Lamden Chitadile, that Cavatina Joba, San Gemneti, Tabla Cava, the Nigel Lap Cava, Duen Cava Inza, Anduscine, Nango Reservada.
In the region that I am from, it is really very undeveloped. So the teacher really has no resources to teach his or her students. So the teacher has to be really innovative. For example, when teaching the words for the varying colors, the teacher will need to show the students something that matches the color. And to do this, because they don't have computers and so forth, then the teacher will open their suitcase and show something that is white, to teach the color white. Show something that is blue, to teach the color blue. And in this way, the little children immediately get that, this is the color blue, this is the color white. So they learn easily, they're enjoying the class, the teacher's pulling out many surprising things, and every day when the teacher comes to school, well, they'll have their case with them to show new things to the students, to try and teach them in this way. So for the teacher, whilst they have to carry a heavy case wherever they go, they know that this technique works. The students quickly learn, and thereby the students are highly motivated and want to come again. In fact, when they see the teacher approaching, they are joyful and they look forward to learning. So this is a skillful way to teach, especially in an undeveloped area where one doesn't have much in the way of resources at all. Buddha Shakyamuni was certainly teaching in a time of limited material development, but he had a knowledge that was limitless, and based on his knowledge and experience, he was able to teach precisely in accordance with the individual karmic backgrounds of each being before him. So this is something rather difficult for us to do, but that is the ideal teacher, and the ideal teacher we need to strive to eventually become.
Labdu Kaplea, Monzuna, that Kamish Shanga Labidu, Yijanja, Chipala, Buz, Machine Van Bear, Busuto Kanga, Kangashu, Atanyodo, the Chikanga shoot some Labdala, and drawing Mativa, Chagu, Chago, Dayang Diwa me Labra Yendige Kalagutusina, Paradilian, Yalang, Chick, Mini She Tang, Trap to such a game yam the trap, and Chick Trap Nekamashi didn't trap. Denichi de Yob Sandu Gorwa, Denichi Laptaros to watch. As I think in Laptang, Ninjora Yahu, Laptangi, Caparoshi, do some being a sword at Dinjusa. Dina, San Jumna, the Gishu Suna de Tahara, when the Laptang Capi, that me come down, Mebadan, Twinby Tone, and the Coronsula Panto, Gare, Dibot Dunga said, Digi to be a tablam, Denish Dumbaza, Jazan Da may get some not Dama Tuken, Ganga chatting in Disela, and Yakap Da Yore, says Sumada, on those Sung Yore Jele.
Similarly, I remember from my own childhood when we were maybe getting a little bit tired or getting a little frustrated because it was difficult, our teacher would recognize this and caring for us would then put the lesson aside and we'd all sing songs together, or maybe we'd do some dances together. And of course, as little kids, this is great. School's a lot of fun. And we then revitalized, re-energized, and then we can sit down and get on with the lesson. So a skillful teacher uses their inner qualities of compassion and their intelligence to help their students fulfill their potential. In particular in our context, help their students to achieve the inner good qualities that will help them attain happiness and eliminate problems and difficulties in their life. So again then, the point here is that instead of teaching selflessness to certain students, the Buddha taught that there was a self.
Dache Ganung Dover Dopigi, Duji Chidu, Yumi Niga Masomba, Daniel Shaba, Lumading Tower, Jushitabu Yins.
Then the paragraph concludes, also some followers were likely to go either to the extreme of reification or to the extreme of nihilism if Buddha answered their questions in the positive or negative. For them, Buddha did not say either exists or does not exist, but remained silent, as in the case of the 14 unanswered questions. Also, with respect to the system of selflessness, he set forth several, as was briefly explained above.
Da Yore Yomare said that the nigga Sangelia to Da Yore Sumbaina, Koanejik Tatalana Lebe. Da Yomare says Sumbaina, and the Jiggy Chetana Lawyer. And the niggy Jiggy bed Nyanga Chimbor Jubaina, that the nation Pandomeva, Cheta Lunge, bed Gangateche, and Dunga Sege, Sabla Dibomusaya Chaya, Nyanga Yora. I can say Yoba Sona. Kasore, bed Tabasinche, and Digi Dibasa, the Nigi Yobanza, Tacheke Takan, Larobanza, delegate, and Madua de Guadu, Sanyi, Len Majavache, Kaya, Masomache, Shuba, Shugo, Resi, Shubaris, the Nigi, that our Jushi, the Nigi Tiwara Jushi, Tanzi, the Nigi, and then Manaba, Tower Jushi said, Jungur, the Solo Lumading, Tower Hesse, Tower Jushi said, Tangatia, Jorva, on this Ungore.
There were then certain circumstances when the Buddha recognized that if before this particular audience he were to say that there is a self, that those students would fall into the extreme of reification or the extreme of existence. But he also knew if he were to present to them selflessness, that those same students then could fall into the extreme of nihilism or the extreme of non-existence. And falling into either of these extremes would pose a serious impediment to their development, their spiritual development, and should wrong views be cultivated, so much harm could come to them. So therefore, rather, the Buddha at these times remained silent.
Da mezulang dir robzam je shebatar namdra mangbo sumba yin se chizan da me se da me bi chu de da da yarum chi de dordu chi sum yue sing robzam se nyunyu chi ge dordu sheba yin chizan ina deni ge da me be namdra be mangbo ya che mo sum yore mangbo san ji sum yore ina da nge de ya dordu chi din ye ya da dordu sum ba yi shu ba yin sum go da me sulang dir robzam che shebatar namdra mangbo sum ba yin se.
And then the final sentence here, also with respect to the systems of selflessness, he set forth several, as was briefly explained above. So His Holiness, who composed our text, very briefly presented the different philosophical schools' views on selflessness on the preceding page.
다음에 봐 하고 그 lödela 다음에 또 별로라고 그래 다음에 봐야 돼 근데 질러기면 뒤또 비게 체마들라 다음에 또 별로시오 당한 저기 대차 콘로 나야 되니게 셈 되지 먼저 인셰반에 셈 냠베릭 라한라 뇌바 셴래 뇌바 라신이가로 뇌베릭 삼로치 삼랑 안 봐야 돼 근데 콘로다고 샤베나 콘로 써야 돼 나한테 깨봐이나 콘로 되게 내가 라한라 뇌거를 셈 맞기 봐샤 셴라야 콘도 디와게 류가가네 츠츠되다 류유고네 쩨방하면 샹렌네 봐 라신이가네 봐 내가 때래 삼다 라신이가네 봐 삼로도 콘도데 진짜 셈간 바래지 다디 콘도다 보데 셈간 바래 지수 매봐 쇠고 그래지 근데 매봐 쇠단 될라양 다 삼로 망부용을 내가 매봐 쇠가 자원에 고 매봐 쇠야 쇠상 직지 직 망불리고 봐 녀모 콘로 매바 써야 되라. 님보 땡탕 되라. 콘로 님보 때 매바 님보 땡탕 되려. 내가 님보 고 뜻 마자매다. 아직 자원이 매바 써야기 님보 땡나 되지. 고 매바 써야 돼야 탑람 나서면 식몽불리고 그러와.
The consciousness that realizes the view of selflessness is a wisdom because it's in accordance with reality, and so it's a wisdom realizing selflessness, and that wisdom is a valid cognizer that realizes selflessness. Contrary minds are afflicted minds such as anger, attachment, and pride. So these fall into the class of unwholesome minds, and they do so because they harm oneself, and through their expression they harm others. So if we take anger, for example, the affliction, the unwholesome mind of anger, its mere arisal harms oneself. Its expression, whether through our physical behavior or verbal communication, harms others. Harms ourselves and others both temporarily or immediately, and through the accumulation of karma, which will cause us to suffer in the future too. To overcome these afflictions, such as anger, the Buddha taught many antidotes, a wide variety of antidotes to temporarily overcome anger, as well as an antidote to completely eradicate anger.
다니는 병아저 콘로다불라 삼다만에 셈간바 매바쇠 디매바쇠 고고로 매바쇠들에 하는 저 삼다하지 콘로 마진예래네 원고 고 마지게 된다로 원고 삼다야디 먼저 가르래람나 지 샤다미 샨디기 뇌바다 간데 준비네 내 강하다 되네 가나 다 콘로세디 기중메 아 삼비게 삼다야디 예침벌 딩원고랑 삼 최고래 콘로 기중메 삼비 콘로 기네데 야고 말해 삼제 콘로 기나 내갑들라라 뇌샹라라시 니가 뇌바 지사 기부요마 콘로 세디 기주요 말해 삼비 원고 삼다나데
So to look a little bit more then at how to eliminate anger. Anger, of course, is a consciousness. To eliminate anger, we need to transform our way of thinking. So firstly, when the mind is not angry, when we're relaxed and calm and spacious, we need to think about the faults of anger, come to recognize with certainty that anger is always harmful, that it harms oneself and its expression harms others, that anger is not justified and needs to be eradicated because it only produces harm.
Kontra kebene supulo ya an semda semle nushu che supule shukche cha anmi chi pasola jengi chöneba chebena sopa sungyop da soso pa kayagi kontra digi che tugure 지자 kontra 판도 요레스 장아도 디와파 지 람가 창가 소보질 마치 쪽에는 지 kontra 산전 제베네 미차사 파 람가 따진 죄죄지 바지는 거 소소 줘야 탑람이야 용그레스 지사 당아도 미마와 지소 날야 칼라 중염도 직도와 사구여번에 칼라 뉴뉴마도 맨 kontra 소보시네 델 칼라라야 마 라야 둠제 kontra 오다 콜마데네 고 kontra 랑게세 네 콜 라야 지사 kontra 세드 타지도 메와 저거에 민두와 kontra데네 판도 주야 망고도 선비게 당아도 삼로 날라 용식으로 와 지사 kontra 사와 자와데 메바 저거에 민두 kontra데 판도에 두세비게 kontra 사고도 kontra 사나가도 판도도 선비게 삼로 날라 용식으로 와
This first step is a step we need to take. We shouldn't just readily accept that anger is harmful because our society encourages us in certain circumstances to be angry. Our society in certain circumstances sees anger as justified and beneficial. For example, we may, if we look at our lives, see times when actually I was angry and it served a good purpose. It made me brave. It made me stand up in the face of anger, a face of danger. Perhaps there was a group of tough, mean-looking people, and I needed to move through them. If I'm angry myself, they will part. They will be intimidated by me. Or maybe if there's a delicious buffet and many people are trying to get food and you don't want to miss out, anger can be very useful. Push everyone aside, fill up your plate. So thinking like this then, we can see, well, sometimes anger serves me quite well.
지게 소소의 숨겨져야 돼. 되게 뛰어서 판바 용식이 이나 니기 풀이야 판바요 말에. 그래서는 다디 내가부터 코로사데 미션다기 나 미션다기의 뉴버로 시라 메딩 안줄이야 코로사반 지금 봐 지게 구샤스 제가 지금 바이 되고로 와. 또 콘솔리아 뉴버체 고급잖아. 소소리아 고급 현다기 고급잖아. 오다 미디 코로 소브르냐만 배둑자여선 봐. 되니 차상기 강아지야 책으로 와. 진짜 되니기 풀라 내마도 강아지야마도 지게 팬도시 용거 말 띵기 판도 용거 말에. 안디면 배가 아주 레균제 개와치선 개와의 디바섬다나 콘로 가지나 디바사고 되자 되니기 원게 콘로 첨보서도 콘로데 가지 슈처저로도 안디체바나 아주 그 동게 넘겨내 받어야다 류기 아니 락비기 마슈야다 되네세네 샤네 강아데 된디기 인제 소솔야 아니 지기 강아데야 돼 녀바포야 돼 되네 용고래 안디나지 개와 디바섬다나 개와 치마이네 아주 디바사고래 제상아 저기 셈상보 콘로 개와 있나 셈상보 샤래야 잠바단 제외 삼로 개와래야 개와래 발시지고래 제상 디니게 잠바단 제외 삼 개마도 나가줘야 상기고 바토야래 다른 부채고 진짜 디네서 콘내갑데 스테스 팬도로 되어서 용식이때 그 디기 팬바다 뇌바치는 뇌래 망할이고래 자자 자네 다 자자 구주 고고로 뇌비직리고래 대 자자 직삼디 아주 팬바르지 내갑디 용식바로와 콘로 가시가실래 되네.
So sure, one can maybe point to some situations like this and say, yeah, I got benefit from anger. But we can also recognize that any immediate benefit that's achieved, not only is it debatable, but at the very best, that benefit is trivial. Where the danger comes, though, is perhaps in two main directions. One, the more to whatever extent anger or its companion minds, or the minds of the same class, such as frustration and annoyance, to whatever extent these arise, we strengthen our habituation to them. We strengthen their unintentional arisal. And from that, we will be angry at times that clearly brings harm to others as well. And harm comes to others even if it's our anger is expressed in no way other than our facial expression. This causes others to breathe in deeply, to take a step backwards, especially if we've earned a reputation for anger. And of course, the expression of anger, again, including frustration and annoyance, can bring harm to others, can lead to physical altercations, and even just harsh speech does bring harm to others. Then the second class of harm that comes from a habituation to anger is the negative karma that comes. The mere arisal of anger, especially when it's abiding in us and strengthening, we're creating negative karma. And it's certainly when we express it, this too creates further negative karma. And this only leads to suffering in the future. When that karmic imprint ripens, it does not ripen in happiness. Moreover, anger is an obstacle to our cultivation of love and compassion. Anger is a clear obstacle to the cultivation of love and compassion. And without cultivating love and compassion, bodhicitta and therefore Buddhahood are pushed forever further away. So therefore there are these short-term harm to oneself and others, as well as then the harm through our suffering in our future lives, and the harm in terms of our spiritual developments.
samdana chigla u jungus kombaina den ma shi do ya ge shungure da dine ko re ke yode lamsa shanda ka samata che so su u di pa da su ji de pa u pa da de u pa dang ge sam da u chu tian de u chu tian ge什么 di rang samda je u pa da chu tian pa da chu tian de mi samlo di kya ya samda je du che ne u pa da su da che be ne 네 콘도 섬로디 길리길리 시루래 고 콘도디 내 내가 시에 탑람 대 우중고 고미야디게 콘도 내가 시에 탑라야 자기래.
The first step of the meditation again then is to reflect on the faults of anger so as to gain absolute certainty that anger is harmful, and almost develop a fear or an apprehension for anger, seeing it as an enemy that only brings harm. Then in terms of antidotes, there are many. So one simple antidote that doesn't require much explanation is when you noticing the mind going in a way of frustration or annoyance or anger, turn your attention intentionally turn your attention to the calming natural rhythm of your breath. Take your mind away from what you are angry about, not thinking about the object of your anger, but rather focus on the calming natural rhythm of your breath.
Dine kondo shiyan di chele ane di ji kondo sa se ge samlo di chol sam ma da che samlo shanda chol dan de ne ko kondo di negap shi ru ko re de dine ge negap shi ye tablam de dine yong si ru an di men be ngan zo ge ji Geshe da den jiga ba ji lu zero ji zhe de ba shu jia ji zhe ga le ra ka sho ne den ga le ka de samlo de le de yang ho de ma shi de yong de den shi de ka bla an den ge ma shi de den je le ya den ge kon de me be ga de yang jia kon de sa gi yu gi chol ya sam ma da shi sha sha ba ne de so ne ga ge kon de shi ye ge tablam ru cha go re ma do den yi Lamsa meba chatu mara jema na khon se kese yu de te on yang khon sa gi ro.
Another simple to employ techniques or antidote would be to distract your mind. Do something very different to try to take your mind from whatever you're thinking about that is making one angry. Or thirdly, exercise, especially exercise vigorously. This too will take one's mind off from what one was thinking about. So these the application of these antidotes only temporarily overcome anger. When one meets again difficult circumstances, again one will flare up. But nevertheless, these are useful, but they will be employed or utilized by one only in dependence on the prior recollection or reflection on the faults of anger, so that one wants to distract one's mind. One sees anger as dangerous, as harmful, and wants to distract one's mind, or wants to exercise to forget about what's upsetting one.
Now, control Zawan in Meba Suedi, Mahomba, Guinea, Zawan Meba Suedi, the Dameba said, Dameba said the candidate said Jebache, Di Hakowache, Dameba Hakowache, the net Dameba topic, Lodi, Hakosone, Dameba topic, Lodi, Gomne, and the court control said, Nyomo, control Maze, Nyomo Candicine, Zawan Meba Suedi, Dameba topic, Tawa said, Committee Chagore, De Lodi Combalatine, the Nyomo, control down, Duecha, and Najan, Nyomo Candicine Chazan, Zawan Meba Sutuagida, Nimbodi Tablam de Dameba said Jebache, Dameba topic, Lodi, Toba, the nigger topic, Lodi, Combalatine, and it Nyomo by the Zawan Meba Suagade, Dameba topic, Tawa Chagore, Nimbodi Tiade.
In addition to those very temporary antidotes, there are far better antidotes which are also classed as temporary. But the one antidote that will completely eradicate anger so that one never again becomes even annoyed or frustrated is to successfully cultivate the wisdom realizing selflessness. To the extent that one develops familiarity or habituation to the view of selflessness, to that extent, anger will arise less frequently, be of less strength, and not abide. And this wisdom realizing selflessness, not only is it the ultimate antidote, the supreme antidote to anger, it is actually the supreme antidote to all the afflictions. When the wisdom realizing selflessness is realized, it's not only anger that will never arise again, but none of the afflictions, attachment, pride, jealousy, all will be completely eradicated.
Now, that Yarm taking out the Carson Chorus and down drinking and the Shaggy Lobsang Dorje, Dandala Carson Chorus and down the same gate the YouTube Dunga Sevelia and the same Sangandige Yawache, Pene Sang same Controsh Kebaina, down the Jebache Chorus or Jebajina Controsh Kebaina, Contro the Yuganishli Gido, Contro Ki Kabla, Nakaptelang, Anzole Kibu Due, Young Medo, Shala Kadachivido. The condo digi Lungagi Numbuganis Tungudo. That Lungagi Numbu Shala never the Pandokan Yungudo. Sosolia and the Pandodan never can Yungudu, see Shimju, Controgi, Kiade, Controgi, and no more Canis do see Shimju. Dinis the Hakowache Wars. Another Nisu Kanga, the Hamogo in this Utane Mamukanga Ligo, just Hakowache Wars. The Hakowache. Chizan Dini do Shimju, Controgi, Ramakiba. Digi Lunga Gujoba Nambatea, Digi Shala Neba, and the Digi Kenja Rala Neba, the Russian Nigala Neba, Kanga Yuba, Dunga Yungubadi, Seba Hakuri, Ejere. That was a country same Nambatiche. That same Zambote, Jale, Jamba, some chance, Jale, Pembe, some much Kebana, this some no delatine, and Lungagi, some of the education, Pembe, some of the ledu, and so yak and its talk and its ligido. Digi, Pembe, some of Digi. Lunga Gujoba Nambu Canis Tungudu. Di Lunga Gujo Nambu Digi, Shala Canis Pengudu, Nugudu, Duce. That Jala Payment near the Digi Genja Sosolia and Payment and Nuba Cadungudu. Do Shimjevana? Do Shimjevana? Sem Sambi, Shala Pembe, Samla Digi, more than Kui 제부 주바 제부 팬들이 하고 그래. 제자들 간주 코로 개발네 간주 콘트리기 치티기 치는 바 직주도야 동그 넘중 안 받도야 디지션 매기 보셔야 되리고와 제가 전에 판별 삼바 삼 잠지 삼을 게도 니게 나게 치티 년부 송이셔야 안시한 동그 넘교도 좀 다도야 디 되어도 파저 미디나 가랑라 차야 안 파저 가랑라 차도 출래 아니 넘교야고 되 기시야고 셔도 소소에 가랑라 차 내가 sometimes 현래 판별 삼도 다we나 라신이가 라 판바 니기 아는 아주 선배 상비 선디데 누가 쳐줘야 탈바 담지 기부고 봐 타냐 두고레스 진짜도 신의 제바지 심주지 셈상보는 안반이 디기 두제 셈상보 안바 콘도체 디도체 셈상보데 현래 판별 삼바체 니니기 기류가는 스키기도 디니 소소 요리갑라 나아서 초와 가는 중구도 현래 초와 가는 스티기도 현래 초와 제비 긴게랑라야 안판도간 판도간 용도 지 심주체네 제사 되니체도 셈상비도 어디 야구도 디 야구 민도 셈베 삼로도 하고 그래서 디 하고도 다 야구 민도 셈베 삼로 레송바나 디파 빠야게 탑람데 먼저 베스 쳔부 듬바 쳔불리 그래서 디 야구도 셈베 삼로 레송나 디 안저게 다냐지야다 야게 다야라 먼저 메바 듬바 쳔다 심주 쳔리 그래서 되는 인상 먼저 야게 줘도 땅도 그래 도시네 야게 땅고 그래서 돼 나 여름 저게 다 송야디 저기 제바지 삼로 땅 두마다 아니 디제네 싱ger마도 롭정 제네 싱ger 마제나 싱 말해서지 안 여름지게 갈롭 뛰는 거래 지나디 상이게 상여 좀내데 송바다 하러 퇴삼 곰숨세 당부 파니에 롭정지 퇴고 그래서 퇴네 퇴바증이 돈다들 야네 한도 삼당 네 돈다들 하고 연데 되네 로디 곰제 누바 철당 거래 퇴삼 곰숨세 거 디다 여름지 갈롭 나나다 지가 도순거래 당한저 디링기 당한저 롭산디기 디네 지나가서 샘상보 콘트로식제 샘상보 현래 판별사바지 니이디 간의 도스 병안도 삼려야 제바지 심주제야다 두전 삼다야디 아주 기침을 차고래.
To summarize then what we've looked at tonight, which ties in with the classes we've already had thus far, is Holiness has presented that the happiness we long for comes about in dependence on a way of thinking, in particular the development of the class of minds that we can call wholesome. And the suffering that we wish to be completely separated from, this depends on weakening and eventually eliminating our habitual ways of thinking that can be called unwholesome. So if we take the illustration again of one unwholesome thought, or way of thinking rather, that of anger, we need to then think for ourselves, what effect does anger have? What effect does it have on me? How do I feel when it arises? And when I express it, what is the impact it has on others? If I express myself under the influence of the mind of anger, if I express myself physically, what impact does that have on others? If I express myself verbally, what impact does that have on others? Thinking like this, be very clear, anger causes harm. And we should, when we think like this, we should not just think in a theoretical way, but recall situations from our own life experience where we have been angry or where we've been a recipient of someone else's anger. And then when we see the grave danger that this affliction of anger places us in, as well as those around us, be very clear. We will not want to come under its influence again. And that then will lead us to look for what are the causes that lead us to get angry. What are the situations? What are our triggers? So what we are doing here, this is just the illustration of anger, but one can do it with other afflictions, attachment, pride, and so forth. What we're doing here is developing knowledge so as to overcome our ignorance. And we do this with various minds included within the unwholesome group. But he also should do it within wholesome minds, because the purpose of reflecting on the effects and then the cause of unwholesome minds such as anger is so that we can have the inner confidence and strength of mind to turn our habitual ways of acting away from harmful ways of thinking. So we should also then do the same process, but with wholesome ways of thinking, such as having a beneficial attitude, an altruistic attitude. The process is the same. First, recall a time when one had an altruistic attitude, when one had the spontaneous wish to be of benefit to others. And think then first, how did it make you feel? And then when you expressed it, physically or verbally, what impact did it have on others? Then, just like with anger, one will see how it made one feel, the impact it had on others. One will recognize the benefit. And one will look at, so what are those causes that led to me acting this way? How can I develop more of those causes? So here again, we're developing knowledge so as to overcome our ignorance. We go through our day, very busy, a lot of activity, but we're not paying so much attention. We're not mindful of our inner workings. We need to become aware of the impact various consciousnesses have on us, and through their expression on others, and thereafter the causes that led to it. Because it's with that knowledge that we can start to change the way we react to certain stimuli. So we're looking at, firstly, temporary results, and then later one also will look at the long-term, the ultimate results, which take us closer to Buddhahood, which keep us trapped here in samsara. In terms of temporary benefits, we see that as we strengthen our wholesome ways of thinking, weaken our unwholesome ways of thinking, we will start to have close and warm and beneficial relationships with whomever we encounter, whether it's our family, whether it's our colleagues, whether it's just people we come into contact with occasionally in society. We'll have a close and warm interaction with them. And this will be natural and spontaneous because of our spiritual development. And this will have further benefits in that we won't feel alone, whether we are physically alone or we're with strangers. We'll feel a closeness and affinity with others. We'll feel an inner strength. We won't become weak-minded and dispirited. And this comes about through reflecting like this, coming to gather knowledge and not be so ignorant of our situation. So what His Holiness has also been advising us here tonight is that we must think for ourselves. We need to become educated. And this theme will continue tomorrow as well. And it is so important in the Buddhist religion to use our intelligence, because to transform ourselves, this comes about in dependence on meditation. But meditation, to be effective, needs to be based on knowledge. So therefore, there's the presentation of hearing, reflecting, and meditation, this threefold presentation. One needs to hear, so this is gathering knowledge through teachings, through reading, and so forth. And whilst one gathers knowledge, whilst one is gathering knowledge, one reflects on that knowledge, gaining ever deeper certainty and conviction. So these two are done in conjunction, always gathering more knowledge to enable our reflection, our analysis, our investigation to go deeper. And when we become particularly proficient on a topic, not just on intellectual knowledge, but in terms of already having had deep transformation, then one is ready to meditate. And so meditation in different contexts has different meanings. Here it has a specific meaning. So here in this context, meditation follows from reflection, although generally how we use meditation incorporates reflection. But His Holiness here tonight and this weekend again emphasizes the need for us to think for ourselves, to take responsibility for our own mind, to come to know ourselves well, so that we can transform ourselves, so that we can become the person we long to be, so that we can fulfill our human potential. We'll conclude here for tonight, then thank you. We've gone a little bit over time, so if you have questions, please hold on to them for tomorrow. Thank you very much.